Welcome back for Unit 5 review in AP Psychology. Just so you know, this is a huge unit. And looking at College Board CED, it is the largest unit of standards compared to clinical psychology. So you want to make sure that you spend a due amount of time that this unit deserves in studying this. And again, remember, this is a broad overview that I'm going to be giving in this video, and I hope that it sheds light on areas where you need to dive deeper, right? If you feel confident about the things that I'm talking about, just kind of rehash those, rehearse those, and you're good. But if there's areas where you think, oh, I have no idea what she's talking about, you want to take some of your time and really dive deeper into those. So let's go ahead and get started. So I tried to consolidate and choose really big themes for these learning topics because it really is a gigantic unit. So in this video, these are the topics that we're really going to be focusing on. Know that most of these are really big. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on there, including memory and forgetting, talking about those together, thinking and problem solving, language we'll spend almost no time on, and then intelligence. Now, it's good to focus on what College Board lays out as what you need to be able to do with these things. All of the topics, except for one, is just concept understanding, which is skill 1. So you need to understand the concepts and be able to apply them, right? Like College Board tells us, define, explain, and apply concepts, behaviors, theories, and perspectives. Again, the biggest thing there being able to apply them. But then psychometric principles and intelligence testing, which we'll talk about last, is skill 3. And you need to be able to kind of investigate the scientific procedures there, analyze psychological research studies when it comes to the data that is revealed to us from intelligence testing. So here we go. All right, memory and forgetting. There's so much here, but again, I'm going to go through these quickly. So the first thing with memory is types of processing, right? And how you get things into your brain. And that effortful is actually putting effort towards processing things and really rehearsing and going over things to get it into your brain. But there's also items that we just automatically process. Factual information is not one of those. Things like space, where you are when you eat lunch, frequency, how many pieces of pizza you eat, those sorts of things we automatically process. Time, the general time of day, we automatically process those. We don't have to say to ourselves, I am now eating my 4th piece of pizza. You generally just kind of pay attention to that and you get it without thinking about it. And then there's deep versus shallow. Shallow just being, okay, let's try and go over this as much as possible, kind of what this review video does. But the deep processing is what you've already done in the unit, right? When you went over this with your teacher long ago, that was more deep processing to really make sure it was in your brain. The types of memory include the stages of memory, like sensory memory is first, and it only lasts momentarily, right? And it's either iconic or echoic. Iconic meaning visual, or echoic meaning through your ears, right? And that if you pay attention to those in your sensory memory, that information then goes into your short-term memory, which lasts about 30 seconds and has enough room for about 7 items, plus or minus 2. And then if we really rehearse and work on those items, meaning it's in our working memory when it's in our short-term memory, we get those items into our long-term memory. The long-term memory having limitless capacity and can last as long as we use the information. And that kind of clues us into points that we'll talk about with forgetting, and that long-term memory is where storage happens, right? So there's encoding, storage, retrieval, and long-term memory is storage, and that those things can decay. They definitely can. Implicit versus explicit. So all learning of new memories is processed through the hippocampus, right? That is all explicit memories, okay? All explicit memories are processed through the hippocampus. Implicit memories are not necessarily processed through the hippocampus. Implicit memories are ones that we cannot declare we remember, okay? We cannot declare that we remember, but they do in fact influence our behavior. And therefore, something happened. We don't know what happened necessarily, but it influences our behavior. And therefore, the hippocampus wasn't necessarily used there, or it no longer is, right? So an example I give my students is, do you remember learning how to brush your teeth, right? You were probably 2 years old and you were taught by your parents how to brush your teeth. Most students, and you probably are now saying, no, I do not remember learning how to brush my teeth. But then I ask, but does it influence your behavior knowing how to brush your teeth? And I joke, I hope so, because I hope you brushed your teeth today, right? That's an implicit memory. It's also a procedural memory, because most procedural memories are implicit. Okay, and that we don't have to think up to ourselves, okay, I must put my foot on the brake and now shift the gear into reverse in order to back out of our driveway. You don't have to go through those steps necessarily. You might not also remember how, meaning learning how to put your car in reverse, and yet it influences your behavior, right? So most procedural memories are implicit, but then explicit memories are declarative, and that we can declare, I have that memory. Then there's also episodic, which are we remember the episodes of our personal lives and the scenes that we have from experiences. And then there's semantic memory, like George Washington is the first president, those kind of factual memories. All right, then there's those stages of memory with encoding, storage, and retrieval. But I also throw in forgetting here, because when you learned about forgetting, all of the vocab terms that you learned as types of forgetting are types of forgetting that kind of plug into encoding, storage, or retrieval. It's either an encoding failure, storage decay, or a retrieval failure. Okay, so encoding, getting the information into our brains. Storage is just keeping it there. And then retrieval is using retrieval cues to get it out of our brains, right? There really is so much for each of these three stages that you're going to want to go over. But what I'm going to do here is just talk about the forgetting influences, essentially. So there's the next in line effect and the serial position effect, and how with both of these, it's an encoding failure because we simply are not paying attention to the information in the first place because of different reasons, and therefore the information doesn't even get in our brain. Next in line, we're not even listening to the person in front of us at the bank because we're so worried about what it is we want to ask them about this check that we have or whatever it is we're trying to do when we're there. So we don't even get the information into our brain. Encoding failure. Same with serial position. We are really great at listening to the beginning, and therefore we're trying to remember the beginning, and we space out in the middle, and then we're like, oh, I bet she's getting to the end now. And so we think about, oh, I got to remember the end too. That's also called primacy recency effect. Storage decay is just storage decay, and that if you don't use it, you lose it, or it goes away, it becomes weaker, and that's because of a lack of what's called long-term potentiation. Long-term potentiation is your neurons lifting weights, and that when you use a memory, your neurons get stronger, specifically the synaptic connections between neurons. It's like it's losing weight. Just like if you tear an ACL and you don't use your right leg as much because of that, your muscles atrophy. Same goes with your neurons. And then there's interference versus amnesia. Interference is just normal forgetting. Remember, proactive old, retroactive new. Remember that mnemonic? Yeah, you should remember that mnemonic. Make sure you go over interference there. And really all mnemonics in general, like chunking and all of that. Amnesia is brain trauma of some sort with anterograde and retrograde amnesia. Anterograde being after the accident and that you can't form new memories. Retrograde being throwback, and old meaning you can't remember old stuff like where you live or who your mom is. Retrieval failure includes tip of the tongue phenomenon, in that it's right there. I know what it is. I know his name, but I can't think of it. That is a retrieval failure because you don't have proper cues in place that your brain needs to get the information out. Okay, moving right along. Thinking and problem solving. Organization is huge here. Concept is the category. Schema is the list of characteristics to know that the item fits in that concept. And prototype is what you think of. It's your best example, your mental representation of the schema and therefore of the concept. Algorithms versus heuristics are what we use to solve problems. Algorithms guarantee the solution but take longer. Heuristics are shortcuts, which is nice, but also error prone. Availability versus representativeness heuristic, in that you use what is most readily available in your brain to solve a problem or make judgments about something, would be availability. But if that's on an FRQ, make sure you don't say available. Right? That's the idea of using synonyms. So when you're describing the availability heuristic is when, that's what you would say in your FRQ, we use what is most thought about or most easily comes to mind. There you go. Most easily comes to mind for us to solve a particular problem. Whereas representativeness is all about the prototype. If that is on the FRQ and you don't use the word prototype, you are less likely to get that point. Representativeness heuristic is when we make judgments on a new situation based on how well it meets our prototype. Bam, there's your definition. And it's not long, nor should your definitions ever be long. Then there's types of fixation, including functional fixedness. Our fixation in this one is on how we use a particular object to solve a problem, and we can't see that as being used to solve any other problems. A lot of times people talk about Ariel on The Little Mermaid and how she uses a fork to brush her hair and how that demonstrates functional fixedness. Actually, it doesn't. She does not succumb to functional fixedness, and therefore if you use that example, you're giving an example of not functional fixedness and would not get the point. Make sure that you aren't prescribing, that you are actually giving an example or applying it of this is how she's using functional fixedness or how she's succumbing to it. You don't want to succumb to it. You want to overcome it. So functional fixedness would be you have like a bobby pin and like a safety pin or something like that in your pockets when you're locked out of your house, but you say, I don't need to clip back my hair so I can't get into my house, rather than see it as, I could maybe use this hair thing to pick the lock, something like that. Mental set is fixating on a particular solution to a problem, in that you cannot think outside of that one solution, and that solution is the only way to solve that problem. And you're fixated on that. And then there's bias. Please making sure that you understand that you are biased even when you say you're not. And in fact, if you say you are, you probably are even more so biased. Confirmation bias is when you're actively looking for information and you just don't see the stuff that contradicts you. That's it. Belief bias is that from the beginning, just the idea that you have the belief and therefore it's going to bias how you see new information, and will even make you come to illogical, unreasonable conclusions. Belief perseverance is when the contradicting evidence kind of hits you in the face and you still stick to it. Please don't call these people dumb because you've probably done it before. But the contradicting evidence is right there and they say, I see that contradicting evidence, but I'm going to plow right through it and just stick to my beliefs because that's what I believe. Then framing versus priming are other ways that our thinking and problem solving is kind of thrown off, but they're also easily confused. Framing is the presentation of the stimulus itself, in that when it's presented a different way, it frames or influences how we respond to that information. So think of the lean or fat content of meat. I'm more likely to buy a 90% lean pound of ground beef than I am a 10% fat ground beef. Priming is when a separate stimulus is presented, and that separate stimulus then influences how you respond to a question or information. So showing you a picture of a bear and then asking you to spell the word bear, right? That would be priming you because the picture is a separate stimulus. Language, this one's quick. Know that morphemes are smallest unit of meaning, morpheme meaning. Phoneme, like on a phone, is like sound, right? So phoneme is the smallest units of sound, like SH, 2 letters, 1 sound. A morpheme would be ly, lee, because lee adds to the word and changes the meaning of that word, or ed or es. Now, that is a rule of semantics. Semantics being our grammar rules around the meaning of words, like adding ed makes a word past tense, whereas syntax is the order of our sentences, saying White House, not Casablanca. And then the big debate in language being about, is it innate or is it learned? Chomsky says that it's innate, and he says that we have a language acquisition device that we're born with. Skinner says, no, we're an empty slate, and we learn all language. Then there's intelligence, and there's lots of people who weigh in on intelligence. You got to know all of them. G with Spearman saying that there's this general intelligence, and no one else is intelligent unless you have G. Multiple intelligences with Gardner says there's 9 different types of intelligences, and kind of knowing the basis of each of those, probably important. Triarchic with Sternberg, and that there's 3 types, analytical, practical, and creative, and that we can be any combination of those 3. And then there's the test creators and those theorists like Binet, the guy in France who made the test to determine the mental age of children in school so that they could better be served. And then Terman, the American who worked at Stanford, who made the Stanford-Binet test. And then Weschler, who made the WAIS and WISC, adult versus child intelligence tests, that had a performance and a verbal component to the tests. Fluid versus crystallized intelligence. Fluid is the ability to handle new information and solve problems with new information as we age, meaning once we get past our prime adulthood, young adulthood, middle adulthood, essentially, that tends to decrease as we get older, as we age. Crystallized is wisdom. Think of crystallized as like it gets hard, right? So think hard facts. Wisdom increases with age, as long as nothing's going wrong in the brain with something like Alzheimer's or dementia. And then there's the Flynn effect. Flynn is a guy, he's actually a man, who theorized that as time goes by, right, on Earth, people are getting more intelligent, as measured by the intelligence test. And he says that that is not because we are genetically more intelligent, it's because of our environment with things like higher quality schools, healthcare, etc. Now, testing is really important because if you remember at the beginning of the video, this is where they have skill 3, and that you need to be able to analyze psychological research studies using the psychometrics of intelligence testing. So standardization is huge, and that intelligence tests have to be standardized, reliable, and valid. Okay, so let's use the Flynn effect and kind of apply that to standardization, right? If the Flynn effect says that we are getting smarter as time goes by, then why is it that on the normal curve of intelligence tests, the 100 is still the average? Why is it that a 100 back in, 1928 and a 100 now, those actually carry 2 different meanings, in that a 100 on the intelligence test now is actually more intelligent, and yet it's still called a 100. That is because of standardization. What they do is they see how people perform on a test, and most of the time it has that normal curve, right? But that normal curve is going farther and farther up. But all they do is take the X and Y axis and shift it up with the normal curve. So when a test is standardized, what they're doing is finding the norms of the test. So for instance, the AP psychology test is given to a sample of first-year college students in like a Psych 101 course, and they develop the norms, meaning the average, the mean, median, mode. They find the normal curve. That then determines your scores that you're going to have in the AP psychology test are then compared to those. Reliability, meaning, does it yield consistent results? If you step on a scale today and then you step on a scale 5 minutes later and it gives you 2 different numbers, that scale is not a reliable measure because it's not giving you the same measure. Whereas validity is you're not going to go weigh yourself when you want to know how tall you are. That would not be a valid measurement of your height. Okay. Now you want to make sure that you go over how to determine reliability with like test, retest, and half testing and all of that. We kind of talked about the normal curve and that the average on the normal curve, right, is 100, and then the standard deviation is 15. So every jump out is 15 points. And then the relevant labels of intelligent, being gifted, is an intelligence score of 130 and higher would be intellectually gifted. An intelligence score of 70 or lower would be intellectually disabled. Whew, all right, that was a lot, but there's still more that you really should go back and make sure that you go over and dive a little deeper in studying that vocab. So I hope this was helpful, and stay tuned for the next video. See ya.